Hi, my name is Danielle Tenkoni. I'm a graduate student here at K-State. I'm doing my Masters in Communications and Journalism and I'm in my second year, and I'm British. I'm originally from London, which is the capital of the United Kingdom, and I've been in the US for about 2 years. So you'll notice my accent's changed a little bit, but I really have a classic London accent. So for those of you that don't know about the United Kingdom, basically we're made up of England, Ireland, Scotland and Wales. We're really developed as a country, and we have the world's 6th largest economy and the 7th largest economy by purchasing power. So we're very small. If I give you a comparison, we're about the same size as Florida geographically, but our population is pretty big in comparison. So we have a population of 60 million people, approximately 60 million, and 12 million of those people live in London, which is our capital. So you can imagine the cost of land and the amount of space that we have is pretty limited. So everything's a little bit smaller in the United Kingdom than it is here in the US. We were the world's very first industrialised country, and during the 19th and earlier 20th century we were probably one of the leading countries in the world. However, that's not the situation anymore. And despite the fact that we have lost a lot of our wealth and a lot of our political power, we still remain at the forefront of many political and economic issues and decisions, and still carry a lot of weight within the world. So the big differences that I've seen, I thought I'd kick off with just some of my initial observations as living in the US, because I've lived in Virginia, in Georgia and in Kansas, and I'm married to a man from Kentucky, so I've got quite a good experience of the US so far in my 2 years here. And the big thing that I've seen is generally our politics are more liberal. So our political party at the most right is probably not as conservative as the average Republican. So that's one thing that I've observed. Sometimes I'm viewed as socialist within my policies in the US. However, when I go home, I'm seen as more of a centre. So that's one of the big differences. The second one is that we drive on the left-hand side of the road, and our roads and our cars are much smaller than anything in the US. There'd be no way that you could get an American truck in a parking space in the UK, and it's quite hilarious to try and see people that have bought big American cars try and park because you have to take up 2 spaces. In fact, everything's really smaller. The size of houses, the size of yards, the size of cars, the portions in restaurants, everything is much smaller. We speak the same language, yet we use different words and different spellings. So there's some words that you'd use in the US that could be not seen as offensive, but could be seen as strange within the UK, and vice versa. So whenever I say rubbish, for example, you would say trash, or garbage. I say a boot, you would say a trunk. So there's lots of differences there, even though we do speak the same language. So sometimes it can get very confusing. I'll tell you, I asked for a glass of water the other day in a restaurant, and the guy thought that I was ordering a Michelob Ultra, and that happens very often to me. Particularly the word water and butter are very, very difficult for me in restaurants. British humour is very different from American humour. It's quite dry, it's quite sarcastic, and you'll probably see that if you're interested in watching British TV shows. We're not as enthusiastic as Americans. I'm probably overly enthusiastic for a British person, so we're often seen as grumpy, a little bit boring. It's just culturally the way that we are. We also have a bit of a motto of just, be quiet, carry on, just kind of grit your teeth, don't complain, and that's more of the British sense of mentality. So often we're viewed negatively by Americans, but it's not really the case. We just like to keep stuff within rather than the external. Interestingly, one of the biggest shocks for me was we have far less sugar and salt in our products than in America. So exactly the same brands will have completely different ingredients. So for example, breakfast cereals. I can't eat American breakfast cereals because the sugar content is 4 times that of the UK. So that was a real difference for me, is just adjusting to the different types of foods, even though they're exactly the same brands owned by the same companies. So one of the big things that's different about the UK and the US is that we have a monarchy, and this is very topical at the moment with the marriage of Prince William to Kate Middleton. So we have a monarchy system. They don't really have any real power anymore. They're more for the value of tourism. But it's very interesting because during the royal wedding I was in the UK, but I also recorded, DVR'd a lot of the coverage of the royal wedding, and it was very interesting to see the difference between the US coverage, which was immense. I couldn't believe the amount of US coverage there was, and also how enthusiastic Americans were getting about it and really into the royal wedding, and lots of comparisons to Charles and Diana's wedding. However, in the UK it was a little bit more subdued, though everyone was very proud of the wedding, but there was not the quantity that I saw in the US, so that was very interesting for me. The second thing is our political system is slightly different. So we have a House of Parliament and a House of Lords. Now the House of Parliament is elected and the House of Lords is not, so they become Lords either through lineage, so through inheriting their title, or they're made Lords by the Queen. So our Prime Minister is David Cameron, and he is a member of the Conservative Party, which is a kind of equivalent to the Republican Party. However, there's been lots of political issues and there's no real majority at the moment. It's very much split within the government. And we have 3 main parties, 2 really, but there's one additional party. So we have the Conservatives, we have the Labour Party. Now you may remember the Labour Party from Tony Blair, our former Prime Minister. And then also we have the Liberal Democrats. And basically the situation is at the moment that because there is pretty much the same percentage for Labour and Conservatives, the Liberal Democrats decide who to put their votes with. So the Liberal Democrats this year chose Conservative Party, and that's why the Conservative Party are in power. However, it could be slightly different. So they're very tied at the moment within the UK in terms of politics. You may also see that our debates within Parliament are televised, and they get very aggressive and very vocal and very direct. So if you haven't seen one of those, it's worth looking on YouTube to see, because they're interesting for content, but they're also very different from something that you'd see in the Senate, for example. The next slide I've got is about British pastimes. So the first thing is we love tea, and we love tea time. There is nothing that a good cup of tea cannot cure. If you're sick, if you're happy, if you're been in shock, if you're just had a baby, you get a cup of tea. A cup of tea is a very basic mandatory need in the UK. We have it with milk and often sugar, and we drink it all throughout the day. I think I used to drink about 10 cups of tea, and this is hot tea, not cold sweet tea, and we drink a lot of tea. And we like tea time. Now tea time is at a very specific time. It's between 3 and 5 in the afternoon, and we have sandwiches and cakes and tea. And it's quite a peculiar phenomenon within the UK, but it's also quite cool as well. And you'd come home from school, for example, at 4 o'clock, and you'd have tea time, which was a little light tea before you then have supper or dinner. We don't eat out as regularly as Americans, as generally the cost of living is much higher. So for example, McDonald's is about 1/3 more expensive in the UK than it is in the US. Pizza is very expensive, it's about $30 for just an average pizza. Basically everything's more expensive, so people don't tend to eat out as much. It can cost anything, a good evening meal out for 2 will cost you about $100. So people don't have the luxury of being able to afford it, especially in the current economy which has hit the UK as much as it hit the US. We love going to the pub. Now, the official name is a public house, which is where they serve alcohol and food, but children are allowed in pubs. So it's more of a family atmosphere rather than a bar, but pubs are very central to UK culture. And you'll even see people give directions via pubs. So they'll tell you to turn left at one certain pub and then right at another. So pubs are really important to UK culture. We walk a lot, so we have sidewalks on every single road, and walking is a big British pastime. But we also use public transport very regularly as well. Because of the size of the country, there's a lot of traffic. So any time that people can avoid driving, that's wonderful. And teenagers, for example, do not drive themselves to school, they take public transport. You don't necessarily really get a car until you're working or basically after university or after school when you're actually working, because it's gas as well is three times the price as it is here. Our number one food is curry, quite interestingly. It used to be fish and chips, which is a bit of a British stereotype, but actually curry is the number one food, and the number one dish is chicken tikka masala, which no Indian would probably ever eat, but it was made for British people. So if you haven't had an Indian curry before, I'd highly recommend it because they're delicious. So popular music. So as you can imagine, much of our popular music is exactly the same as the US. So all of the big stars like Lady Gaga, Beyonce, Jay-Z, all those kind of people are just as popular in the UK as they are in the US. However, British people are very proud of British music, and they really celebrate British music regularly. So for example, in the summer, we have a number of different music festivals where you camp out for 4 days and you see all of your top acts. So you get to see all of the best of music, and a lot of the time they're international bands, but they're predominantly British bands as well. We also have our own award ceremony to celebrate British music, which is called the Brit Awards. So it's really honouring the best of British music. And I put a few pictures in the slides. So you have Take That, which are the number one British band, and then you also have Girls Aloud, which are the number one girls band. And you'll notice that there's a person called Cheryl Cole in Girls Aloud, who you probably will never heard of by now. However, she's going to be one of the judges in the new X Factor. So you'll know Cheryl Cole in about 6 months' time. Whether or not you'll be able to understand her is a different matter though, because her accent is very, very strong. So this brings us on to television. Now television is similar because we have many US shows, like Friends for example, and NCIS. And we have many of the same programs, but they're made to be British in style. So for example, we have Strictly Come Dancing, which you all know as Dancing with the Stars. So we just have a slightly different change in name, but we have exactly the same panel of judges except for Carrie-Anne Phillips. So it's quite interesting the difference. There's only slight differences between the US and the UK in many programs. We also have the X Factor, which you will be having soon in the US. We used to have Pop Idol, which you have as American Idol, but the ratings went so low that we just got rid of it. Big Brother used to be huge in the UK, and I know that you have that in the US. And one really popular show at the moment in the UK is Jersey Shore, unfortunately, but it's quite interesting to see the difference, how people have responded really positively to Jersey Shore. They think it's hilarious. So there's many similarities. The real difference is the amount of commercial time. We only really have about 4 to 5 minutes of commercial time in a 30-minute episode. So our commercial time is very, very short in comparison to watching a US program. So that was something that I had to adjust to when watching British TV. And what's been a really interesting observation, and there's quite a few articles on this academically, is the difference between British series and American series. So British series television is creator driven and shows have very short complete runs. So for example, 10 to 12 episodes is the average British television showtime. However, in the US it's more ratings and revenue driven. So stories are sometimes dragged out, sometimes not, but sometimes they are. to make possible episodes last longer, and so you have years and years and years of the same TV show. So for example, one good example is Lost, and you may even think Two and a Half Men maybe is another example of this. And the average amount of episodes in a US series is 24 episodes. So it's really interesting looking at the comparison between the two. We have the BBC, which is the British Broadcasting Corporation, and I think it's a fantastic thing to have within the United Kingdom. Now what the BBC is it's a taxpayer-funded enterprise, and they create everything from news to television programmes. They have their own channels, they have 4 channels, they have great radio, great web. If you've never looked at it, go on to bbc.com, it's excellent journalism. And basically you pay about $100 a year as a television license, and that's a television tax. So every household that has one television pays a tax, and that goes to the BBC, and the BBC use that then to create programmes, to do everything, to have radio. They have great radio. And what's really interesting about the BBC is that there is no advertising at all. It's completely funded by the citizens of the UK, and that's it. There's no advertising. It's fantastic. So it's pure programming the whole way. And I'd really highly suggest that you have a look at bbc.com, and then maybe even try and listen to some of the radio programmes as well, because they've got some great content on there. Newspapers. Now we have 2 different types of newspapers. We have the broadsheets and we have the tabloids. Both are available online and have some great content. So The Guardian, for example, has a brilliant website. The Times as well is pretty good. Now the broadsheets are more serious in their content, so they tend to talk about political issues, international affairs, and there's a number of different publications. The Times, The Guardian, The Telegraph would be considered broadsheets. And then the tabloids are more about celebrity gossip and scandals, particularly when our footballers have affairs with reality TV shows. That's when the tabloids really have great circulation. And they are, both the tabloids and the broadsheets are available daily, but where the really great stuff comes is on a Sunday. So Sunday newspapers are a real tradition in the UK, and you basically get this huge newspaper with many different sections, and you go and buy it in the morning. It comes out about 5 AM in the morning, and you go and buy it and you have your breakfast, long leisurely breakfast on a Sunday morning, and you read the newspaper, and it will take you probably about 3 hours to get through every single part of it, but it's a real experience for British people. And that's something that I have missed being in the US, because I haven't been able to find that kind of similar content. So it's very interesting. If you're ever in the UK on a Sunday, buy a Sunday paper, because you can really see the difference between the journalism. So my next slide is about sport. So sport is very popular in the UK. Now we have different sports though from the US. So football for us is what you would call soccer. And rugby is very popular, cricket and tennis. And one really interesting thing is that we don't really have college sports. So in the US I was completely blown away by the stadiums and the coverage, and the fact that 25,000 people are going to college sports games. My first K-State football game was a complete shock to me, because if you went to see your college team, there may be 20 people going to cheer on the rugby team, not 20,000 people. We don't have cheerleaders, we don't have the band at half-time, we don't have anything like that. So for me that's really exciting and something very different. We don't buy the merchandise from our schools, for example, so the university that I did my undergrad in, we don't purchase that merchandise. However, in the US I know that I have tons of K-State merchandise. So that's one really interesting thing about the differences between sport in the UK and the US. One really exciting aspect for next year to keep an eye out for is the Olympics, which will be in the UK, and it's something that we're very proud about. Unfortunately, when the Olympics were announced, it was a great party, particularly in London. The whole country was really happy, but the next day, unfortunately, we had terrorist bombings. So it's really a bittersweet moment within the Olympics. However, everyone's very, very positive about the Olympics coming to London. And an interesting fact for you is that London is the only city ever in history to hold the Olympics 3 times. So it's a really historic occasion for us as well next year. The Olympics have been doing some really great work in terms of getting people involved, getting young people to volunteer, really promoting sports within the UK. And you should go and have a look on the website. I think it's 2012 LondonOlympics.com. You should check that out because it's a great website and it has really good information about sport, the Olympics, and what's going to be coming up. But one of the interesting things for me from kind of a PR perspective is the way that they've been able to raise a lot of money is by working a lot on sports sponsorship. So the big players like Adidas, BMW, BP, British Airways, all those kind of companies are really funding the Olympics in a big way. So you should look for examples of great advertising, sports partnership, PR in that as well, because there should be some really great examples. Okay, so that's basically it from me. So in real summary, we've got lots of similarities between the US and the UK, particularly on the surface. But when you dig a bit deeper, you'll really see that we have a very distinct culture and media. So thank you very much. I hope you found this interesting, and bye.